After the premature and complicated ending to the Carmelo Anthony era, in which the franchise was only able to make one conference finals appearance, and the unexpected success of the Ty Lawson, Andre Iguodala, and Kenneth Faried era, which saw the organization win 57 games in 2013 and take a young Golden State Warriors to 6 games in those playoffs, the Denver Nuggets entered the 2014 NBA Draft looking to rebuild their team in hopes of bringing the organization its first championship in franchise history. In this draft, the Nuggets would have 3 picks, which would end up being the 11th, the 41st, and the 56th picks, respectively. Now, this draft was headlined by 3 big-name players in Andrew Wiggins, Jabari Parker, and Joel Embiid. And with Denver not having a top 10 pick, it was safe to assume that the Nuggets would have a hard time finding a quality player to build around, as those marquee names were sure to be off the board by the time they would be selecting. So with the 11th pick, the Nuggets selected Doug McDermott, which they would then trade to the Chicago Bulls for Gary Harris. And after that, the Nuggets would not select again until the 41st pick. And because this was a second-round pick and nobody really cared, it was revealed during a Taco Bell commercial that with the 41st pick, the Denver Nuggets had selected a player by the name of Nikola Jokic. And no one would know it at the time, but this player would begin the process of the Nuggets rebuild and would eventually lead them to the promised land. Hey yo, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo, YouTube is the one and the only, the outstanding and the remarkable Jared the Analyst. And as many of you know, the Denver Nuggets have just completed one of the greatest story arcs in NBA history. From humble beginnings and building this team from the ground up, the Denver Nuggets have now solidified their place in NBA history as the 2023 NBA champions. But how exactly did they get here? Did they tank? Did they try to create a super team? Well, let's go ahead and dive into it and see how we got here and see exactly what happened. So like I stated before, in the 2014 NBA Draft, the Denver Nuggets would trade for Gary Harris and select Nikola Jokic with the 41st pick. From there, they would go on to win 30 games in the next season, which would be the 2014-2015 season, as Jokic would play one last season overseas before coming into the NBA. Now in the 2015-2016 season, the Nuggets would finish with a slight improvement of 33 wins, while also being led by Danilo Gallinari and new head coach who was hired during the 2015 offseason, Michael Malone. It's also key to note that out of the 80 games that Jokic played in his rookie year, he ended up starting in 55 of them, which would give a slight glimpse as to the player he'd eventually become. Before we get to that though, the Nuggets record would give them a top 10 pick in the upcoming 2016 NBA Draft, and with this pick, they used it to select a 6'4" guard out of the University of Kentucky by the name of Jamal Murray. Next to Gary Harris, Jamal Murray was meant to be the point guard of the team, who was more of a point of attack and playmaking/shot creation type threat, while Gary Harris was meant to be more of a 3-and-D off guard, the likes of Klay Thompson. And with those two men in the backcourt, the Nuggets front court will also feature a unique duo with the likes of Jusuf Nurkic and Nikola Jokic, as Jokic's passing and offensive IQ, which allowed him to operate more in the high post, would be paired with Nurkic's low post scoring ability. These two duos, along with Gallinari, Will Barton, and Wilson Chandler, the Nuggets would improve in the 2016-2017 season to 40 wins, which would see them just missing out of the playoffs with the 9th seed. What was more of a talking point, though, was midway through the season, the Nuggets would actually trade Jusuf Nurkic to the Portland Trailblazers and in return receive a 2017 draft pick and Mason Plumlee. This was essentially giving the keys to a 21-year-old Nikola Jokic and allowing him to be the lone center for this team. And in the 25 games after Nurkic was traded, Jokic would average 17.5 points, nearly 12 rebounds and 6 assists, while shooting 56% from the field and 83% from the free throw line. Getting into the 2017 draft, the Nuggets would oddly enough end up drafting Donovan Mitchell, but obviously they would trade him to the Utah Jazz. However, they did end up drafting Monte Morris with the 51st pick, which would add to the depth of their bench. Now getting into the 2017 offseason, and with Jokic now being one of the focal points of the offense, the Nuggets again decided to take a risky move by trading Danilo Gallinari, who had been the leading scorer for the team for the past 2 seasons, in a 3-team trade with the Atlanta Hawks and the Los Angeles Clippers, and all the Nuggets received in return was a second-round pick. However, knowing that they needed another forward to pair alongside Jokic, the Nuggets would go out and sign Paul Millsap, who was not only a capable floor spacer, but also a great defender who could guard the bigger wings in the Western Conference, especially now that that conference featured players like Kevin Durant, Paul George, and Jimmy Butler. With the forward position now taken care of, the 2017-2018 season saw the Nuggets show the first glimpse of the team that they'd eventually become. Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic were promoted as full-time starters, and they would begin the process of developing the dynamic offense that would characterize their play. Gary Harris had a great season, averaging 17.5 points and almost 2 steals, while shooting 48% from the field and 39% from behind the arc. And Paul Millsap also had an excellent season, averaging 14 points and providing the defensive presence that was desperately needed on this team. The Nuggets would improve to 46 wins on the season, but it still just wasn't enough. Even with the improvements the Nuggets made, they again missed out on the playoffs and would have to wait another year in order to get a shot at the postseason. This now leads us into the 2018 draft, in which the Nuggets held the 14th pick in this draft. And with that, they would use it to select a 6'10 sniper out of the University of Missouri named Michael Porter Jr. Then in the offseason, they would re-sign Jokic, Will Barton, and Torrey Craig, and for the most part, they kept their roster the same from the year prior. This now brings us to the 2018-2019 season, where the Nuggets truly broke out as one of the premier teams in the NBA. Now, unfortunately, Michael Porter Jr. would be sidelined the entire year with a back injury, but that did not stop the Nuggets from continuing to build on the path that they had carved out for themselves the year prior. Jamal Murray would step up in Gary Harris's absence, who only played 57 games this year and had a much worse year statistically than the year prior. Murray would average 18 points and 5 assists on 43% shooting from the field and 36% from 3. Monte Morris and Malik Beasley were great additions to the Nuggets bench and providing them with a depth that helped to sustain them throughout their run. And Michael Malone continued to show the ability to think outside of the box and implement offensive and defensive schemes that challenged the typical norm of basketball. But of course, the true standout and the biggest difference for the Nuggets this year was the emergence of Nikola Jokic, as he would once again up his play, averaging 20 points, 11 rebounds, and 7 assists, while shooting 51% from the field and 82% from the free throw line. Jokic would also be rewarded with his first All-Star and All-NBA selection, and was starting to put the league on notice about the offensive excellence that he had the ability to express. The Nuggets would finish this season with a 54-win season, which would give them the second best record in the Western Conference, right behind the Golden State Warriors. This would match them up with the San Antonio Spurs in the first round, to which they would win in 7 games, with Jokic averaging 23 points, 12 rebounds, and 9 assists, Jamal Murray pitching in 19 points and 4 assists, and Gary Harris being able to pick right back up with him putting up 14 points and shooting 46% from the three-point line. They then matched up with the Portland Trail Blazers in the second round, and one of my personal favorite series of all time, where 5 out of the 7 games were decided within 8 points. This also included a quadruple overtime Game 3, where Nikola Jokic played 65 minutes and had a 33-point, 18-rebound, and 14-assist triple-double in a 3-point loss. Paul Millsap also stepped up big, as for the series, he averaged almost 18 points and 8 rebounds while shooting 39% from 3. The Nuggets defense was also able to hold Damian Lillard, who was coming off an iconic first-round series against the Oklahoma City Thunder, to just shooting 41% from the field and 28% from 3. And even though it did come down to a Game 7, and the Nuggets had put up a valiant effort, CJ McCollum showed up when his team needed him the most and closed out the series for the Blazers. But of course, heading into the offseason, and the Nuggets were not at all discouraged. They had finally made the playoffs for the first time in the Jokic era, and they were a game away from making the conference finals, which is something they hadn't done in a decade. So in the 2019 offseason, with Paul Millsap starting to slow down, the Nuggets needed another athletic frontcourt forward who could be a mobile lob threat while also holding his ground defensively. So on July 8th, the Nuggets would trade a first-round pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder, and in return they would receive Jeremy Grant. They then re-signed Jamal Murray, and were all set for the 2019-2020 season. During the 2019-2020 regular season, the Nuggets were able to have Michael Porter Jr. return, as well as the continued emergence of Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, the latter of which made another All-NBA and All-Star appearance, and Jeremy Grant proved to be a great addition as he averaged 12 points off the bench while shooting 48% from the field and 39% from three. And even with the 5-month hiatus that the NBA went on, the Denver Nuggets still would finish with a 46-27 record, giving them the third seed in the Western Conference. This would match them up with the Utah Jazz in the first round, in which Donovan Mitchell seemed to be a man possessed. And after Game 4, after Mitchell had dropped 57 points in Game 1 and 51 in Game 4, the Denver Nuggets were down 3-1 and needed a miracle in order to still have a chance. However, it would be Jamal Murray to the rescue, as in this series, he had a coming out party in Games 5 through 7, with him going for 42 points in Game 5 and 50 in Game 6. Then in Game 7, with both Murray and Mitchell cooling off, Jokic would step up and close out the series for Denver, dropping 30 points and 14 rebounds, as the Nuggets would win by only 2 points. They then would go up against the Los Angeles Clippers in the second round, who most had expected to win the championship that year after they had added both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in the offseason. And once again, it seemed as if Denver would be sent home early after the Clippers took a 3-1 lead after Game 4. However, Game 5 is where things turned around, as the Nuggets team effort helped them to overcome a 36-point effort from Kawhi Leonard. Then in Game 6, Nikola Jokic would muster up 34 points, 14 rebounds, and 7 assists, and would lead Denver into tying the series at 3 apiece. And then in Game 7, after a tremendous game from Jamal Murray, the Nuggets would once again overcome a 3-1 deficit and defeat the Los Angeles Clippers to advance to their first conference finals since 2009. Now matched up against the Los Angeles Lakers, who were also seen as potential championship favorites as they had just acquired Anthony Davis in the offseason, and the Nuggets ended up trailing 3-1 once again in this series, but this time there would be no comeback. A 38-point triple-double in Game 5 from LeBron James would close out the series and send the Nuggets home for the season. Once again, though, the Nuggets had plenty of positives to pull from the season. Not only were they able to see the potential of Michael Porter Jr., but both Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic took steps in their game that was ascending not only themselves, but now the Denver Nuggets in the rankings throughout the league, and they also became the first team in NBA history to come back from 2 3-1 deficits in a single postseason. The Nuggets would only look to get better from here, and that would start in the 2020 offseason. This is where they would make another move that seemed questionable at the time, but would make sense down the line, as they went and traded Jeremy Grant, who, granted, didn't really have the greatest postseason, but was still a pivotal part of their rotation, especially with Paul Millsap getting older. They then made a couple of other minor trades and signings and moved right along into the 2020-2021 season. The Nuggets would once again come out strong and look to capitalize off the success of their previous postseason run. Jamal Murray had continued his success and posted up the best season of his career, averaging 21 points and 5 assists on 47-41-87 splits. Then on March 25th of 2021, the Nuggets would trade Gary Harris to the Orlando Magic, who unfortunately had been struggling with injuries and had faded into the background with the emergence of Jamal Murray. And in return, the Denver Nuggets would receive Aaron Gordon, another athletic forward who may not have been as great of a floor spacer as Jeremy Grant or even Paul Millsap, but was still a viable lob threat and a defensive piece to pair alongside Nikola Jokic. And speaking of Jokic, he would once again take another leap in his game, jumping from a perennial All-NBA and All-Star performer to now becoming an MVP caliber player. Everything seemed to be going well for the Nuggets until tragedy struck. As 2.5 weeks after the Nuggets made the Aaron Gordon trade, in a game against the Golden State Warriors, Jamal Murray was going up for a layup, but as soon as he went up, he immediately grabbed his knee and went down to the floor. He had to be helped off the court, and it was later revealed that he had suffered a season-ending ACL tear, and it was unclear if he'd even be able to return for the following season. This was obviously a crushing blow for the Denver Nuggets, as any hopes at a championship were seemingly thrown out the window, and the Nuggets now had to figure out what to do moving forward. This, however, allowed Michael Porter Jr. to now flourish, as in the absence of Jamal Murray, all those extra shots were now being given to him, and he did not disappoint. As in the 17 games after Murray's injury, MPJ was a flamethrower, putting up 23.5 points while shooting 56% from the field and 49% from 3 on 8 attempts. However, it would be Nikola Jokic that would step up, as after Murray's injury, many expected the Nuggets to plummet in the standings and possibly even out of the playoffs. However, in the 18 games after Murray's injury, Jokic would not allow the Nuggets to lay down and would put up 27 points and 11 rebounds with 7 assists while shooting 57% from the field and 90% from the free throw line, while leading the Nuggets to a 13-5 record. This amazing performance, along with the success of the Nuggets, not only granted Jokic another All-NBA and All-Star selection, but granted him his first Most Valuable Player award. The Nuggets would finish the 2021 season with a 47-25 record, which placed them third in the Western Conference and matched them up with the Portland Trail Blazers in the first round. This time, though, the Nuggets would prevail, as even with the scorching hot series from Dame, Nikola Jokic would match him with 33 points and 10 rebounds, with some great help from both Michael Porter Jr. and Monte Morris. They then matched up with the new-look Phoenix Suns in the second round, who had just acquired Chris Paul in the offseason. And even though the Nuggets did what they could, Chris Paul and Devin Booker completely torched the Nuggets in the pick and roll and would sweep them, sending them home early once again. After this season, the main focus of the Nuggets was of course trying to get Jamal Murray back healthy, who, if the Nuggets were able to stay afloat, could potentially return for the following season's playoffs. So much of the offseason was again spent trying to fill out the roster, as the Nuggets would allow Paul Millsap to walk and replace him as they signed Jeff Green. They also drafted Bones Highland and re-signed players such as JaMychal Green and Austin Rivers, and the Nuggets were gearing up for an uncertain 2021-2022 season. And the Nuggets would get off to a rocky start to the 2021-2022 season, going 4-4 in their first 8 games. And when it rains, it pours, because immediately following that, Michael Porter Jr. would re-injure his back, causing him to miss the remainder of the season. So now with 2 out of the 3 best players on the sideline, it was up to Nikola Jokic to carry the team as far as he could, and that he did, posting up 27 points, 14 rebounds, and 8 assists, while carrying the Denver Nuggets to a 48-win regular season. And just like the previous season, not only would Jokic be rewarded with another All-Star and All-NBA selection, but he would be rewarded with his second Most Valuable Player award. With their record, Denver would secure the 6th seed and be matched up with the Golden State Warriors in the first round of the 2022 playoffs. Unfortunately, though, just like the year prior, Nikola Jokic would post up amazing numbers of 31 points and 13 rebounds across the 5-game series, but it just wasn't enough. Again, Jokic was targeted in the pick and roll, and the lack of offensive help without Porter Jr. and Murray could only get the Nuggets so far, succumbing to the eventual NBA champions in 5 games. This now brings us to this past offseason, where the Nuggets would hopefully be able to get a fully healthy run and gain a proper assessment of the team and the players they had established. Unfortunately though, due to the individual excellence of Nikola Jokic and the unfortunate lack of success surrounding the Denver Nuggets as a team, questions started to arise in the media about the Nuggets' legitimacy and if they truly had what it took to get it done.
Nikola Jokic has been voted the NBA's most valuable player for a second consecutive season.
And 2 years in a row, his team is at home when the award is actually announced.
He's not as dominant as Giannis and Joel Embiid.
Nuggets president of basketball operations Tim Connolly is leaving the organization and heading to Minnesota.
A massive deal.
Devastating loss to the organization.
Let me say this about Michael Porter. I have no faith in him because of his health.
And with both Murray and Porter Jr. getting ready to return to action, Denver was determined to make things work this year. So they went ahead and drafted Christian Braun in the 2022 NBA draft. Then they traded Will Barton and Monte Morris, who were 2 key players in their rotation, to the Washington Wizards, and in exchange they received Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They would then sign Bruce Brown as a free agent, and now officially in the 2023 season, and the Nuggets had one goal. They had already established themselves, they had already gotten the necessary pieces to create their team, and already established a style of play that they believed would get them to the finish line. All they needed was health, and health is what they got. I've already spoken about Nikola Jokic this past year, and how this was easily one of the greatest individual seasons in the past 20 to 25 years. But more importantly than Jokic's individual excellence was the fact that Jamal Murray and Michael Porter Jr. played a majority of the regular season and got into enough rhythm for the playoffs. Bruce Brown, KCP, and Jeff Green all proved to be amazing additions to the roster, and the Nuggets were consistently atop the Western Conference as the number 1 seed. The Nuggets would finish with a 53-29 record, which gave them the number 1 seed in the Western Conference. And entering the 2023 playoffs, and once again, the Nuggets knew that they needed to achieve a championship to validate the journey to this point. And once they dispatched of the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round, is when their real test began. In the second round, they would have to match up with the Phoenix Suns, who now featured Kevin Durant after his departure from the Brooklyn Nets. 2 teams who were quite literally the opposite of one another, and this showed as they split the first 4 games. Then in Game 5, the Nuggets were able to secure a 16-point win behind a great game from Jokic, and in Game 6, Jokic would once again propel his team to a blowout victory with a 32-point triple-double and a trip to the conference finals once again. And just like in 2020, which was their last healthy run, they ran into the Los Angeles Lakers. But this time, things were different. With Jokic peaking and LeBron James being 3 years older, the Lakers had no answer for Jokic, along with the onslaught of offense that the Nuggets possessed. And after a great last-second defensive possession for the Nuggets in Game 4, the Denver Nuggets had booked their first trip to the NBA Finals in franchise history. And they would come face-to-face with the 8th-seeded Miami Heat, who were looking to win a championship for the first time in a decade. Both teams would split the first 2 games, and heading back to Miami, the Nuggets knew that they needed to take back home court advantage, and that they did behind a historic performance from Jokic and Jamal Murray in Game 3, and a 27-point effort from Aaron Gordon in Game 4 to go up 3-1. And with Game 5 back at home, the Nuggets had an opportunity to make franchise history, and that they did. With another amazing performance from Jokic, the Denver Nuggets would survive a late-game surge from the Heat and also hold Jimmy Butler to shoot 5 for 18 from the field. They won the game by 5 points, and has secured their first NBA championship in their 47-year franchise history. Nikola Jokic will be rewarded with the Finals MVP, and the Nuggets currently sit atop the NBA world. Now notice how throughout that playoff run, rarely did I list off any statistical excellence or any sort of individual awards. Because as the Nuggets embodied throughout this entire playoff run and this entire timeline of constructing this team, it was never about the numbers. It was never about any individual success, and it certainly was never about trying to appease to what people deemed as a contender. This was about winning a championship and doing whatever it took to win the championship and secure their place as one of the best teams in the past decade. And also, once again, this team was not built through tanking. This was a team that took multiple risks and chances on players who were overlooked. On a player who was drafted during a Taco Bell commercial, a player who assumed that he'd be traded after his ACL injury, a player who fell out of the top 10 due to his back injury, a player who people thought would be only known as a dunk contest runner-up, a player who was called one of the worst MVPs of all time. This team took all of that and created a truly memorable and amazing run, and a sincere congratulations must go out to the entire Denver Nuggets organization for the patience and persistence that they have displayed. And with all that being said, and the 2023 season now in the history books, I would like to thank you all for joining me today. Once again, a huge shout out to Nikola Jokic, the entire Denver Nuggets organization, front office, coaching staff, for the amazing seasons that they have gone through, and even just the past couple of years, all the patience that they have had to display, and just an amazing run from the Denver Nuggets this year. Anywho, please let me know what you thought about the video. Please comment, subscribe, and like. And until next time, please take care.